Hey everyone, it's Grant. I'm Extempore's community manager, and we're back with another blog breakdown. Today, we're looking at this guy, our newest blog on listening assessments on Extempore. Quite a bit to unpack. Buckle up, I hope you're ready. So, what are we talking about today? Well, in the first part of the blog, we're going to talk about what exactly is listening and how it compares to the other skills when it comes to teaching languages. Then we will look at some specific examples on Extempore, 4, in fact. The first, listening to a short message without having to respond. The second being listening to a long message but not having to respond. The third, listening to a message in the target language and responding in the target language. And then finally, for our fourth example, listening to a message in the target language and responding in the shared language, so not the target language. How are these going to look? Well, stick around and you'll see. First thing that I want to talk about when we talk about listening is I like to cite this quote. I've used this in previous presentations before. One I did with our friends at Dexful. Another I did on just listening assessments in general in previous webinars. And here's a quote. It's from Renner Kadevi 2014. It's a really, really powerful quote. It's long. You can skip over this if you need to, but I like reading it just to really emphasize the role that listening has when teaching and learning other languages. Even though the other skills such as reading, speaking, and writing are essential to develop language proficiency, listening contributes primarily for language expertise. Listening awakens awareness of the language as it is a receptive skill that first develops in a human being. Learning to listen to the target language improves language ability. The sound, rhythm, intonation, and stress of the language can only be perfectly adapted through listening. To understand the nuances in a particular language, one must be able to listen. As we get to understand spoken language by listening, it is easier to improve the other skills and gain confidence. I can tell you that myself. I listen to so much Chinese, I can use what I'm listening in my spoken language. Listening helps the language learner to understand the beauty of the language. You can agree with that. Music, poetry, right? Anything that we use is spoken, it's listening, we can really get the beauty of the language. Especially in terms of communicative language teaching, that's what we do. It is said that the basis for communicative competence is listening, as it provides the oral input, A-U-R-A-L, and enables learners to interact in spoken communication, and hence, language learning largely depends on listening. Thus, listening forms a concrete basis for the complete language proficiency. And again, that's Renner Kadevi 2014. She adds more though, and I want to come back to this, right? So we see how important listening is when it comes to learning a new language. So much of it comes down to listening. So if it's important for the student, well, we need to be assessing that too. That's imperative that we do that. So some of the things that she says, it awakens our awareness of the language. It's the first skill that we developed. We learn the nuances of the language, whether it's regional pronunciation, different vocabulary that we hear, improving the other skills and gaining confidence. We can hear the beauty of the language. It is so important. It is an integral piece. And yet, further on, 2 more quotes that I want to cite. Listening, unlike the other language skills, is felt comparatively much difficult by the learners. I think a lot of us could agree with that. As it has all its interrelated subskills such as receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, and responding. There is so much mental processing that has to go on when you are listening to something in the target language, and even more when you have to listen and then respond to it. Finally, listening activities, those in the language classroom, generally induce the anxiety and stress among the learners as it involves the interpersonal and interpretive modes of communication in which students have to actively participate. So if it's interpretive and there's no response, there's a lot of pressure because they still have to participate in it. But even once they go to participate and it becomes interpersonal, there is a lot of stress and anxiety on the students. And I think a lot of us could attest to seeing that in our own classrooms. Given all of this, how do we understand this quote? What are we supposed to do with this information before we go to make and choose listening assessments? Well, I think it's important that we just take time to understand this, right? Look at it and take a step back and remember when we were learning a second language or the language that we're teaching or whatever it is, and remember, wow, this can be really hard sometimes. Put ourselves in the shoes of the student and remember there's a lot that goes on when it comes to listening assessments. And that's why it can be one of the most challenging skills when it comes to both assess and grow for a student. For our first example assessment, we're going to look at an announcement, a listening assessment where the student listens to a very short clip and they don't have to respond to it. They simply have to interpret it and show that they interpreted it by answering a few questions, whether multiple choice or open-ended. All right, so here we have listening assessment 1, announcements. I use the exact same audio file for all 4 of these questions. Let's see how it goes. So I click in. Where might want to hear this announcement? Let's listen to the announcement.
本次列车终点站虹桥火车站，下一站豫园，开左边门。
Right, so this is the clip that the students will hear each time they do this assessment. It's the exact same clip for all 4 questions. This says, where might want to hear this announcement? I'm not going to give away the answer, but the student can show linguistic awareness by saying, okay, yeah, I know where I would probably hear this announcement. You would hear this on TV. You would hear this on a train. You would hear this at an airport. You would hear this at school. If they know and they understand the content, they're going to be able to tell you, hey, it's most likely heard in this location. So that's one, the first question that asks for linguistic awareness. The second question, again, exact same piece of information. Here it kind of gives away the answer to the first question. That's okay. Which piece of information is not provided in this clip? The time the train will arrive, which side the doors will open, the next stop, or the last stop. And here, again, the student has to show what they understood about this question, right? What they understood, whether words or phrases, they have to understand the entire clip and say, yeah, I heard this, I heard which side the doors will open, I heard the next stop, and I heard the last stop. Or they can choose, okay, which one was not provided. Again, this is all about what did the student hear, and what was the student able to make out of this clip that they heard. Yeah, I heard this, yeah, I did not hear that. So that's the second question. Third question in this type of assessment involves, which of the following phrases was mentioned in the announcement? This one's a little bit unique here. You see here I have 5 different phrases in Chinese that the student can select from, right? And here, what this comes down to is, again, for me, it's important because my students, Chinese doesn't have letters. You have to know what the characters are in order to read it. Of course, you could do this with languages that use a typical alphabet. But again, the student has to be able to identify, yeah, I heard that phrase and I can select it here. This is simply just hearing something and matching it to what is listed. Okay, so that's some linguistic awareness as well. And then finally, number 4 allows us a pretty unique question type. And I like these questions because they're a bit different from what students normally deal with, but it's still a listening assessment. There's listening on both sides now. So I'm going to play the original announcement.
本次列车终点站虹桥火车站，下一站豫园，开左边门。
So then the student, you give the student options. You say, hey, what would be an appropriate response to this? Again, does the student understand the announcement? Well, tell me if you understand these clips as well.
他几点要来？
Okay.
小心，火车很快。豫园，我们这里要下车吧。他是老人，你应该让座吧。
Okay, so all 4 different options in Chinese for the student to say, yeah, this would be the logical response to this announcement. So again, comprehension of the announcement in the first place and comprehension and situational awareness of these choices over here to choose the correct response. So that's our first example. Again, just listening to a short response. The last thing that I'll add to this is notice this assessment, only 4 questions. To me, that's all you need. I don't need 10 questions of a clip to say, for my students to prove to me that they understood it or not. 4 questions, that's all you need. Keep it simple, but keep it detailed at the same time to the point where you know you're asking questions that, yeah, this is really going to prove that the student understood, or this question might be a little bit too easy. So think about that. Feel free to use this as a template, and we'll move on to the next one. Here, very similar to the first assessment that we saw, except this assessment is a bit longer. The clip is a bit longer that the student is hearing. And our first one was about 9 to 10 seconds. Here, we have listening assessment to entertainment. What I mean by entertainment is that the student is listening to something much longer. So it's not just a short announcement. It's something where it's a song, or it's a clip from a TV show, or it's a poem, or it's something where you are listening to enjoy it, right? There's no linguistic response, target language response required from the student. But the student is still listening to enjoy something and get something out of it. Let's look at a couple other questions here. So you'll see the description says, listen to the poem by Hu Shi. That's the example that I gave. And the recording is found in the questions. Again, first question, listen to the poem written by Hu Shi in 1925. Where is the narrator most likely located? Again, just like the first assessment, linguistic awareness for the student has to understand what's going on and be able to infer, okay, if he's saying this and that, well, this is where he's probably located. That's our first question that we have. Where is the narrator most likely located? Second question that we have, similar to the last one, the narrator of this poem likely feels. Inferences, right? I talked about these in the reading assessments blog that we did. What is the narrator likely feeling, right? Inferences that the students can make, listen to the poem, understand what's going on, understand what's being said, how the narrator would feel in this circumstance, and then choose the correct response. Third question that we have has students, again, like the last one, eliminating things that were not said and using what they heard to determine, okay, these are the things that were talked about. Which of the following does the narrator not reference in this poem? His family, the time of day, the moon, or a friend. If the student understood the poem, if they got the vocabulary, if they got it, then they'll be able to choose, hey, yeah, this one was not heard. All three of these were heard. All of these involve interpretive skills on behalf of the student, both grammatical knowledge, vocabulary awareness, everything that goes into listening. Then finally, the fourth question you'll see is a bit different. It's open-ended. So this allows the students to really say, hey, this is what I interpreted from this poem. What would you say is the narrator's message? And here, the student is responding in the shared language, not the target language. I mean, of course, you could have them do it in the target language, but I think students probably feel a little bit more comfortable, especially talking about poetry or something about entertainment, a bit more comfortable talking about it in the shared language, because then they're not just taking words and phrases that they heard from the, whether it's a TV clip or the poem or the song, and using them in their writing. They actually have to show that they understood what was going on in this assessment and in this poem to show their comprehension. So then they can talk about the narrator's message, they can give details, they can cite specific lines, he said this and that, and he feels this way because I heard this. A great way for your students to show comprehension with this type of assessment. For our third assessment, listening 3, simulated interpersonal. Now, instead of the first two where the student was just listening to a short clip and then a long clip and responding to a few questions, but now instead of the student responding to just basic questions, the student is showing their listening comprehension by speaking in the target language and providing a logical response to what they are hearing on Extempore. So let's see how I simulated interpersonal, not just a question, response, and then move to the next question, all in one question. Let's see how this works on Extempore. I click in. So you'll see this is very simple for the student. They first press record and then they play the audio file. And then as the audio file plays, they are able to respond just like it's a normal conversation. Now, you'll see one other thing here. I teach Chinese, so I like to add in a little level up words or filler words that students can use while they are completing these types of prompts. And the reason I put this is so that students have something to fall back on, and they're not using their typical English mannerisms of, yeah, well, right? They're using things in the target language that people actually say in Chinese to keep the conversation natural and just improve the sort of, the areas that you don't always get to touch on as much in class. And I figure if I put this up for every single assessment, whether typically for interpersonal conversations, eventually they'll get some of these down and they can carry them off into their own speech. Let's see how this example works. So you're gonna hear, we're gonna play this file, we're gonna click record first, then we're gonna play the file. You'll hear spaces in between. That's where I'm gonna respond in the target language. Click record. As soon as I start recording, I can then play record.
这是我的一次去美国呀，你在那边的天气怎么样？我该带什么样的衣服？
这边的天气很好啊，很舒服，应该带很舒服的衣服吧，夏天吧。
哦，原来是这样啊，谢谢你。对了，现在夏天嘛，你们有什么休闲娱乐呢？明州最热门、最流行的地方是什么？
明州最热门、最流行的地方是什么？我觉得应该说是我们这边的 Sculpture Garden， 非常非常流行，大家都很喜欢去那边。
真的吗？好有意思，没想到你们会有这么有趣的爱好。
会啊。
好，那我们下周见吧。你不要忘记周3晚上来机场接我呀。
哦，
多谢了。好，拜拜。
不客气了，下周见。So I finish, I click stop recording, done. If I really wanted to, I could click re-record and do the whole thing over again. But I feel pretty good about it. Submit attempt, and I'm done. So just like that, you have a third example, listening 3, simulated interpersonal. Student plays on their side, listens to the recording, fill in the blanks as you go with your response, and the student can demonstrate their interpersonal skills and their interpretive skills at the same time, showing that they understood and that they can produce the language in the target language to show that they understood. For our fourth and final assessment, we have mediation. What I really like about mediation, and I've talked about this in previous vlogs before, is that it's a very, very authentic, real world task. I did this all the time, especially in the target country, target culture. People do this a lot, especially if you are with a friend or colleague or someone who only speaks your shared language. They do not speak the target language of the area that you are in. You have to help them get through and overcome a lot of problems that they might have. So here, for example, we see the directions say, help mediate for your friend while ordering at a Chinese restaurant. And here's what's going to happen. Students going to jump in and they'll see two things. So here I have a menu and I have an audio file attached. There's two, not just listening here, it's also reading. Could you do this without an authentic resource? Sure, why not? But here is just to show the way you can do this with both a reading resource and a listening resource as well. So I can look at the menu and I have to help my friend order food. But I'm not going to tell them what they have in the target language. I'm going to tell this person, my friend, in the shared language, the language that we share. And that's probably not Chinese. So for this example, I'll do that in English. And what the student can then do is listen to the description.
应该说韭菜水饺是最受欢迎的，对，大家越来越喜欢吃那个。然后牙签馄饨，我个人觉得很好吃，可是好像人家不想吃了。对，最后呢，我们也有锅贴，用辣椒酱蘸一蘸，真的很棒，你应该尝一尝。
So now I have heard what the Laoban, the owner of the restaurant, describes to me about the food, and I have to tell my partner without embarrassing myself and saying, oh, can you say that again? No, I don't want to do that. I need to tell him first time, what did this person say about the food, so I can record and show that I interpreted this properly and say, oh, hey, he talked about the duck blood wontons and he said that they were really good, and then he said that they had pot stickers and that you should try dipping them in a chili sauce and that makes for a delicious lunch. And then my friend can respond however he wants. But that, and then I'm going to stop my response, that shows that response in English, even though I'm not answering any questions, I'm not responding in the target language, I've proven that I've understood and I've accurately interpreted what this person said in the target language. Of course, could you extend this prompt? Yeah, sure, that person could respond back in the shared language, and then I have to respond in the target language. But that's even more work, but that could be a theoretical next step that you could take. So finally, again, mediation occurs. I have something in the target language, I listen to it as a student, and then I share it with somebody in the shared language, and then the situation goes on from there. So there you have it, 4 examples of listening assessments on Extempore. Hey, thank you so much for sticking around for this whole video of this blog breakdown. Appreciate you watching. Hopefully you learned something about listening assessments. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How do you use listening assessments? How might you adapt some of these examples for your classes? And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates on listening assessments, reading assessments, speaking, writing, all 4 modes, all 4 skills, all 3 modes of communication, anything related to language teaching. That's us. See you around.